Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 765 for the 4th of June, 2023. Richard Saunders coming to you from near San Francisco. Coming up on this week's show, Adrienne Hill speaks to someone who very much impressed me when I saw her talk in Canada at the Week in Reason conference, Courtney Heard. And Courtney spoke about the dangers, the real dangers of QAnon as they tear families apart with their ridiculous conspiracy theories, because Courtney knows this firsthand. A very important interview coming up at the top of the show with Courtney Heard. Following that, another important interview, of course. Susan Gerbic speaks to Greg Roe from the Santa Cruz County Skeptics. They're about to do a day trip, and if you're in that general area, you might want to tag along. I wish I could tag along. They're going to a mystery spot. Sounds like a lot of fun. Then it's the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, written by Tim Mendham, and read, of course, once again from Skookum Studios, by Adrienne Hill. Then to round off the show, it's back to the Trove archives, looking at mysterious India, snake charming and healings and more, written in the early part of last century and the late part of the century before. Bear that in mind when you hear some of the terminology used at the time. Of course, they are historical reports. In a couple of days, I'll be making my way back to the airport to fly home to Sydney, Australia. And if you've recently received a family member who's come back from a long trip overseas, possibly with tales to tell, I'm thinking about you. But now it's time for me to run downstairs and have some, shredded wheat and peanuts. Yes, it's delicious. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Canada, and today I'm talking to Courtney Heard. She is the host of the Q Dropped podcast and is from Summerlin, BC, which is located along the shores of Lake Okanagan, the home of the infamous Ogopogo. But today, we won't be talking about the lake monster. We're going to be talking about her personal association with QAnon here in Canada. I'm here with Courtney Heard, and we met at the Western Canadian Reason Conference here in Calgary at the beginning of May. And you gave a very compelling talk, Courtney. In fact, while you were talking, Richard Saunders passed me a note saying, we need to interview you for the Skeptic Zone. And I'm so thrilled you've agreed to join me here. So welcome, Courtney.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you briefly describe what your talk was about at the conference?
Yeah, it was, I titled it, It's Not Just a Difference of Opinion, because I have a podcast called the Q Dropped podcast, where we interview people who have lost somebody in some way or another to conspiracy theories. So my parents ended up going down this rabbit hole, and we say lost them. They're very much still alive, and I still have a relationship with them, but they are simply not the same people that they once were. And for a lot of people, that begins a process of grief, and it's very challenging to deal with. And in my talk, I essentially just explained how, a lot of people will comment before they understand the details of the situation. They'll comment and they'll say, I don't understand how people cannot just coexist with a difference of opinion. And I have to explain often that this isn't just a difference of opinion, that it goes much, much deeper than that. And it has caused, in some of our guests on our podcast, it's caused physical harm. It's caused extensive emotional damage. It's ended marriages. And it's not just a difference of opinion, essentially.
Well, and in your case, I believe it interfered with the grandparents being able to see the grandchildren because they didn't want to get vaccinated, correct?
Yeah. So at the time when we first figured out that my parents kind of went down this rabbit hole, it was around the time that the vaccines for COVID were just coming out. And my brother and I both had children who were too young to get vaccinated. If you'll recall, the vaccines for kids came out much later. And so we wanted to make sure that everybody was safe. And we were staying separate from my senior parents because we were worried about them too. We wanted to make sure that everybody was vaccinated before, or everybody who could be vaccinated was vaccinated before we all got together. That's when it kind of came out because my parents kept making excuses for why they wouldn't get vaccinated. And eventually it came out that they believed all of these crazy conspiracy theories about the vaccine. And that's where it started. Yeah.
And it's so interesting too. My husband, Greg, had no idea until he heard your talk that this was also a Canadian issue because you live in Canada. You're not from the United States. And have you found that there's a lot of other people in Canada that have this same issue with family or friends?
Yeah, actually, it's huge in Canada. It's enormous. And sadly, very sadly, I know we like to separate ourselves from what's going on down south, but it's very much a big thing in Canada. One of the wildest things that I came across in doing my podcast was Romana Didulo, who is this woman in Canada who has claimed that she's the Queen of Canada. And since recently, she claimed to be the Queen of the world.
Oh, I didn't know that bit about her.
Yeah, and it sounds funny. You know, on face value, it sounds funny and stuff until you realize that there are tens of thousands of Canadian, often boomers, who are following this woman and who are listening to everything that she says. Not just that, but she's also convincing them that in February of 2022, Canada as a corporation went bankrupt. And so all of these Canadian institutions don't exist anymore, like the CRA and all of this stuff. So she's actively convinced tens of thousands of Canadians to stop paying their mortgages, stop paying their utility bills, and to stop paying their taxes. And these people are facing foreclosures. A lot of them have already had their homes foreclosed on and have been kicked out. They're facing their utilities being turned off. And it's very, very bad. So I wish it was just something to laugh at, but unfortunately, a lot of people are suffering.
Yeah, very serious. And it is a Canadian issue. Have you found other countries besides US and Canada, because we're so close border-wise, is that why it's more prominent here? Or is it really worldwide, this movement? Do you know?
It's absolutely worldwide. And one of the saddest things I think I found out was the fact that Germany has the second biggest population of QAnon believers after the US. And that made me upset because I was thinking, you know, if things just keep getting crazier here, we could always escape to Europe because, you know, they're so progressive in Europe. But nope, it's not safe there. And it's interesting because we've had a couple of people from Germany on our podcast. And one of the things that both of them have brought up was the fact that it was the war, the Second World War, that kind of, it's like generational trauma that's causing people to distrust authority. That we had one whose parents, up until he was 1 year old, his parents lived in East Germany behind the Berlin Wall. And that was, of course, we knew that was a very authoritarian place to live. And inherently they distrusted authority because of that. And that what has led to them not trusting, you know, the big pharma, and not that you should trust big pharma, but you know what I mean? Like, they don't trust the government. They don't trust Western medicine. They don't trust anything. And so it's led them down this path of QAnon. So Germany's a very unique situation, but there's also lots of people from Australia. In the UK, it's big. And it's pretty much global.
It's global. That's crazy. And is there one particular story that you would consider to be the most unusual to date? They're all very, I mean, these conspiracy theories lead to very unusual things constantly. But one of the ones that really stood out to me, we didn't actually get to interview this person, but I told their story anyway because I felt it was important,
it was posted publicly on the QAnon casualties subreddit. It was a boy who had survived the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting. And he posted on this subreddit that his dad was accusing him of being a crisis actor, was basically telling him that he was lying about this shooting ever taking place. And that this trauma that was very real for this, and this person was a child at the time, obviously, because he's in high school, right? And accusing him that this trauma that he's going through, the greatest trauma of his life, it was not real. He witnessed his friends die in front of him, and his father's telling him, "You're lying about this."
Wow.
That one was very upsetting to read about and very hard to relay that story. But we just interviewed somebody recently, and as of this recording, it's not live, but it might be by the time the podcast comes out. He was, his father was into conspiracy theories his whole life. He's very young. He was like 20 when we interviewed him, I think. And it turned out that like his dad was very distrustful of the medical industry, doctors, hospitals, he wouldn't allow his kids to take medication of any kind. Even though his daughter had a heart condition, she wasn't allowed to take her medication for it. He would call her an addict if she took the medication. Luckily, she lived with her mom, so she was okay. But his son the one that we interviewed, had severe scoliosis, which was not even diagnosed until I believe he was a teenager, because his father refused to take him to hospitals. And one of the saddest parts about it was that his father forced him to play sports, which the doctors now believe exacerbated his condition. And now he's unable to stand and walk and is severely disabled. So that's one of the hardest ones I think I've had to listen to, for sure.
And both of those speak so much to the harms that this causes. Those are pretty serious harms. And do you have any advice for people who find themselves in this situation with family members or friends who have actually gone down this QAnon rabbit hole?
Yeah. My number one advice is to put yourself first, because they are not going to. When people go down this rabbit hole, it becomes their world, and they will do whatever it takes to hang on to these ideas, because they're emotionally, it fills some kind of a void for them. And they're emotionally attached to these ideas. This is not a rational thing, which is why debating with them is useless. You have to put your mental health first, and you cannot be afraid to cut things off when it's becoming too much for you, or even just take a break when it's too much for you, because you only get one life, and you cannot spend it trying to drag somebody out of something that they don't want to get out of. And I always tell people that when it becomes too much, what you need to do is set boundaries with people, with your Q. Set the boundary, make it excruciatingly clear what that boundary is and what the consequences are if they cross it. Make sure they understand both the boundary and the consequences. And if they cross that boundary, follow through with the consequences. Do not hesitate to follow through with the consequences. Because if you set that boundary, tell them about the consequence, and you don't follow through, in their mind, they think you can be walked all over, and they will take advantage of that. So Put yourself first, set boundaries, follow through with the consequences. It's hard, though. It's very hard.
It's so hard, especially when you want them to be part of your life, especially when there's grandchildren involved, etc., like what you're talking about. It's very difficult. But good answers. Is there something that people can do, or where can they turn to? Is there a place they can go, or are there communities out there where you can meet and talk about this? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot out there as far as resources for people who are going through this outside of regular mental health support and stuff like that. But there is, I mentioned the QAnon casualties subreddit on Reddit, and they have a resources page there, which has a number of different places that you can go. There's lots of books We got to interview Mick West yesterday, who wrote Escaping the Rabbit Hole, which is it was a very helpful book for me. Yeah, there's lots of books that are listed on the resources section of the QAnon Casualties subreddit that are very, very helpful and places to go.
Well, I look forward to hearing Mick West because I loved his book as well, but it probably didn't have the same meaning to me as it did to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of reading it in a panic. Like, how do I get my parents out of this?
Yeah, it's a great book. I'll look forward to that. How can people find you and your work? And of course, Richard Saunders will be including the links in the show notes. How can people find you?
Well, you can find the podcast on porthosmedia.net/qdropped. So that's past tense dropped, not Q drop. That's a very different thing. And of course, I'm also on Twitter as godless_mom, and the Q Dropped podcast is on there as well. Q Dropped Pod.
Excellent. Do you have a blog as well, Courtney?
Yeah, godlessmom.com. And I write there very inconsistently. So usually when I have time, I'll write there. I have fun on that one. That one's more for fun.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Courtney. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we talk again soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, that's all for now. And just a side note for listeners outside of Canada, Courtney mentioned the CRA in the interview, which stands for the Canadian Revenue Service, which is the government agency that collects taxes. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill signing off.
Hello, this is Maynard. Did you know that you can listen to the Skeptic Zone on YouTube? Yes, I know, sounds crazy, but it's true. Also, you can hear 40 logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma and funny sketches with Richard Saunders and a host of other skeptics. Just click on the YouTube links on the homepage at skepticzone.tv.
I think we need to think. Here's Susan Gerbic.
Hey, Skeptic Zone listeners, it's Susan Gerbic over here in Monterey County in California. And I'm here with a friend of mine who's a local skeptic group starter-upper. And his name is Greg Roe. Hey, Greg.
Hello.
We're here on the Skeptic Zone podcast because I know that the Skeptic Zone podcast has listeners all around the world, including the United States, not just Australia. And I just wanted to mention to everybody that, Monterey County Skeptics and your group, which is called
Santa Cruz County Skeptics.
Yeah, we're right next to each other. We're going to go do one of our first hangouts together. Can you tell everybody what we're going to go do and when?
The first place we're going to go to is the Mystery Spot, which is a tourist place in Santa Cruz that has a bunch of optical illusions and supposed gravity-defying installations. That's about a 45-minute tour, and then we're all going to head up to the Bigfoot Discovery Museum, as Bigfoot has a lot of local legends around here. We're going to head up there. It's a very small museum up in Felton. The owner's a definite believer, but we're going to go there and just have fun and ask some questions. And after that, we're going to go head back down to Santa Cruz downtown, hang out, and just socialize.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. And I've seen lots of people tell me that they're dying to go too. So it's going to be a lot of fun. This is the first time we're going to try to do something like this because the Santa Cruz County Skeptics have just started, right?
Yeah. We only had one meeting so far. From now on, I think we're going to do one social meeting a month and probably try to also add in maybe some occasional talks. Yeah. See what else comes up. Probably get together with Monterey Skeptics a bit more too.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell people where people can learn more information about what's going on with the Santa Cruz County Skeptics?
So we have a Facebook page. Just if you search for Santa Cruz County Skeptics, you'll find us. And also on meetup.com, you can also find all the events we have going on listed there.
And the date for this Bigfoot exhibit and mystery spot, I don't think we told anybody.
I know, that would be really helpful, wouldn't it? Yeah, Saturday, June 24th, around 1 p.m., we're all going to meet at the mystery spot in Santa Cruz. And you can just find all the information on either Facebook or meetup.com. And I believe if you just Google mystery spot, you can find out all the information about that place as well.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this, and I'm going to bring a carload of people with me, as well as other people from Monterey County Skeptics. So we're about 45 minutes apart from each other. So, hey, people out there, if you can't come and hang out with us, that's sad, but find a local group in your area. There's probably something out there. You don't have to make a fussy, fancy event. Pick something like this. Just hang out. We're not going to do anything to confront anybody. We're not going to do research. We're just going to have a good time, socialize, have something to eat and drink, and just get to know each other and have a good time. And if there isn't a group nearby you, then maybe you should think about starting one. Greg did.
Like I did.
Yeah, he sure did.
Yeah.
And so if you have questions or you want help on starting a group or want to know if there's a group nearby you, you can find out by looking at CFI's website, because they've been gathering all sorts of names of groups that are affiliated together. You can also reach out to them at centerforinquiry.org, or you can email them at info@centerforinquiry.org. So I'm looking forward to seeing you and all your peeps over there in Santa Cruz County. I hope other people join us, or at least reach out for help if they're hoping to join a group or start a group or whatever they need to do. Thank you, guys.
More the merrier.
Richard, how do I get better at telling if people are lying?
It's really simple. What you need to do...
Ghost's real.
Well, actually, funny you should ask that, because what I've
How
discovered...
do I improve my memory?
I've got this great trick.
Can you make me happier?
Okay, look. For answers to 1,000 questions about the incredible world of human behaviour and the psychology of everyday life, join me, psychologist Richard Wiseman.
And me, science journalist Marnie Chesterton.
On Richard Wiseman's On Your Mind, a new podcast from Podimo and Telltale.
Can I win the lottery?
Probably not.
Hello, everyone. This is Adrienne Hill from Skookum Studios here in Calgary, Canada, and I'm going to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 174. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. Not a huge amount of news this last fortnight. Not even a Uri Geller story. But if you'd like to see a lot of longer discussions and articles, then go to our Facebook page for all the latest. Read on, Tim. Okay, Tim, I'll do just that. Psychic scams in Australia. A social issue worth covering. The problems of vulnerable people being conned by psychics offering to lift curses. And I say psychics in air quotes. However, the journalist of this piece is known to have also given psychics the benefit of the doubt. See the article in The Skeptic, Volume 41, Number 3. And the suggestion that there is no one here in Australia psychic busting is wrong. Drop in childhood immunization rates. Vaccine misinformation and reduced confidence in doctors has caused a drop in childhood immunization rates. Not dropping a lot, thank goodness, but any move away from herd immunity levels is a concern, especially after the heights achieved during the pandemic. I'll give you one guess which part of Australia has dropped the most. Harassing a COVID-19 anti-vaxxer. Not the best way to present a rational pro-vaccine argument. A Tasmanian pair is on trial for creating fake social media profiles to harass someone for posting misinformation on COVID-19. And yes, we are aware that the anti-vaxxers often use dodgy strategies, but why sink to their levels? Sounds like a bit of a kerfuffle. Naturopath's dental reflexology. This is a fact check on banned naturopath Barbara O'Neill's curious claims about so-called tooth meridians and problems in specific teeth that are apparently harming other body parts. And we are keeping an eye on the flood of her bizarre health claims appearing on social media. Nature falls for autism pseudoscience. This is psychologist Stuart Weiss's Skeptical Inquirer article on the science journal Nature promoting the debunked theory of facilitated communication. The headline almost implies that autism is a pseudoscience, but the article is about the debunked technique to help non-speaking autistic sufferers to communicate via typing messages. There's more coverage of this in the coming issue of The Skeptic, the journal from Australian skeptics. Skepticon 2023 Call for Papers. The Victorian Skeptics, organisers of this year's Australian Skeptics National Annual Convention, or Skepticon, have put out a call for papers. Skepticon 2023 will be held at the Brain Centre, Melbourne University, on December 2nd through 3rd. Full details are gradually being rolled out on the Skepticon website. The June issue of The Skeptic magazine will soon be appearing with a major report on the legal and financial goings-on of the anti-vaccination movement. It also includes articles on the growth of global medicine as opposed to Western and Eastern, the background of Amazon frog treatments, and a look on the Australian Skeptics' investigation of racing driver Peter Brock's controversial polarizer. In the meantime, the March issue is out and about, with a feature that responds to the regularly raised issue, Why Bother? It is always important to look for relevance, not to rest on any laurels, and to innovate in delivering the skeptical message. We also look at ways psychics can fool you, a classic look at confronting Uri Geller, and the controversial career of the most famous exorcist of the last 50 years. You can read an article by European Skeptics President Claire Klingenberg on the way ahead for skeptics as a sample from the March issue. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both, since the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Learn more about our magazine and subscribe now. Skeptics in Action. If you have any ideas or stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. News leads should be sent to newstips@skeptics.com.au. Submissions for the magazine, etc. should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Comments and suggestions should also go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Items of interest. Skinwalker documentaries. You may have heard of the U.S. Skinwalker Ranch, the location of more paranormal goings-on and associated TV documentaries than any other part of the country. This series of videos takes a long and amusing skeptical look at those claims. The link in the newsletter is for the 5th and almost final part. They are fairly long, so you may need to put some time aside for a binge viewing. The final part looks at the ranch owner's less than generous responses. Are time slips a thing of the past? We assume the headline for this story is a touch of ironic humor. The question is, are these experiences a result of psychological factors, or do they hint at a more complex understanding of reality? This article doesn't say one way or the other, although it does include 5 spooky examples, though there might be some pretty prosaic explanations for them. Listicle: 8 obscure paranormal documentaries. These are supposed to, quote, scare you out of your mind, end quote. Some are interesting, some not. But the catch here is you have to pay to view them. And that might be why they're obscure. Silly Story of the Week. 3 zodiac signs who can see dead people. Okay, let's see what this is about. There's a bit of paranormal cross-pollination here. To save you wading through it, if you're Gemini, Scorpio, or Pisces, then you've got the gift. If you're one of the 10 others, then you have to satisfy yourself with talking only with the living. I guess that's why I never talk to the dead. 'Cause I'm a Leo. And that wraps up the latest news. But before I bid you farewell, this week's Canadian word of the week is kerfuffle or Kerfuffle. Yes, you heard it right. Kerfuffle or Kafuffle. This delightful term is believed to have its origin in the Scottish word kerfuffle, and that's spelled Curfuffle. According to etymonline.com, kerfuffle has been making waves ever since 1970, and the word signifies a commotion or disturbance. And interestingly, kerfuffle shares the same definition and appears to have an earlier lineage which dates back to 1946. Interestingly, not only is this word used a lot in Canada, but there's a game called Kerfuffle that Richard Saunders just might enjoy. Each person gets 25 six-sided dice to roll and strategically play on a board. There's also a lot of books available in Canada with kerfuffle in the title, ranging from a Christian romance called Christmas Car Kerfuffle to my favorite, a children's book called Stink Bomb and Ketchup Face and the Great Kerfuffle Christmas Kidnap. And of course, I turned to my friend ChatGPT and asked it to use kerfuffle in a sentence. I typed, quote, "I'm Canadian and want to use kerfuffle in a funny sentence," end quote. And the Skookum Psychic Seer said, quote, "During the annual maple syrup chugging contest, there was a kerfuffle when 2 overly polite Canadians accidentally bumped into each other, causing a sticky mess of syrup and apologies," end quote. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill signing off.
G'day, this is Dr. Karl Kruszelnicki, proud to be a skeptic, and you can find out more about me at drkarl.com and get lots of free stuff there as well.
Time once again to go back to those pages at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. And in keeping with our habit of looking for strange and unusual things to do with the paranormal, the unknown, I came across this story dated the 17th of September 1938 from the Mercury, Hobart, Tasmania. Medicine and Magic in India. Uncanny powers that elude explanation. A fakir who can wilt a plant by looking at it, a yogi who lives alone with a full-grown lion, A hunter who heals a jungle animal's broken bones by wrapping leaves about them. These and other everyday marvels are told in this story of India, where mysticism has always put materialism in secondary place. Every now and then some story of the weird and the wonderful flashes in the press. A yogi is buried and after a week is dug up alive. A man sleeps on a bed of spikes. Of course, we know that as the bed of nails. A family crawls 300 miles as a penance. A child recalls incidents of a previous birth. A widow throws herself on the funeral pyre of her husband, and so on and so forth. The average reader dismisses these and other stories with a shrug of the shoulders, but he does not quite forget them, for the Indian visitor abroad is very often asked the question, is this, that, or the other fact or fiction? My answer to these questions is that sometimes these stories are garbled or written up, or insufficiently authenticated, that the most unbelievable of them may, however, be accurate, but that in no country of the world does the professional charlatan and the humbug flourish so much as in India. Add to that the proviso that the age of miracles is by no means dead. Things do happen everywhere which cannot be explained by rule of three, and that perhaps in an old country like India, steeped in mysticism where the material has always been given but a secondary place in life, and where austerities and modifications have for centuries been exalted, the unexplainable turns up a little more often than it does elsewhere. Superhuman powers. I can tell you, for example, that I have seen an Indian yogi wilt a plant by just looking at it. And I have met another who lives in a cave with a full-grown lion. That firewalking in some villages is a regular festival, and that I was bored watching a man who was monotonously swallowing nails, glass and stones, and washing it all down with nitric acid. But these things, wonderful as they may be, are of no immediate significance to you and me, and it is another kind of miracle drawn so that it may be fully and scientifically investigated. During the past summer, I was driving through a village of South India when a tyre was punctured, and a small crowd collected around the car to help. And watch, presently, a boy came running up, shouting that someone had been bitten by a snake. One or two of the crowd ran to fetch someone, but the others continued watching my efforts. To my comment on what appeared to be their indifference, they answered, "Oh, that is all right, sir. The old man of the village will fix it." And sure enough, he did, with some sort of white powder, which he smeared on the wound and the lips. They told me it has never been known to fail, and that cures were effected even at the stage where the victim of the cobra bite turns blue and is foaming at the mouth and gasping for breath. The secret of the powder was the jealously guarded heritage of the old man and his family. Long-distance cures. In a significantly different category, but also crying out for investigation, is the case of the station master who knots a piece of thread on a tree when he is told of the time and the place of a snake bite, with the result that the victim, it may be hundreds of miles away, recovers immediately. So great is the faith in, and so many are the reputable witnesses who have testified to this miracle cure, that the government has widely notified the name of the station master and telegrams him giving the time and place of a snakebite. are transferred by the Indian Post Office. As wide is the faith in a certain cure for that dangerous malady, liver and spleen expansion in children, effected by a poorly educated man who has inherited the secret of a powder which has saved many children, including my own, and which in Madras, British and Indian doctors invariably recommend. A little less known, but nevertheless authenticated, to my knowledge, by several reputable witnesses, are cures for a whole host of diseases by a system of massage and anointing with oil, practiced by certain families in Malabar. Native bone setter. I will conclude this list of examples, which could be lengthened to many pages, with the remarkable one of the bone setter of Puttar, I think that's pronounced, about 100 miles from Madras. The man is illiterate, lives in a humble cottage, and refuses to take any fee for his services. But to him are credited miracles of healing. Patients are sent to him from the government hospitals, manned by eminent surgeons. Cases of broken bones so terrible that amputation, or the Puttar Vaidya, I'm not sure what that is, were the only alternatives. The engineer, for instance, who, while superintending the construction of a railway bridge, fell to the rocky bed of a river and smashed his thigh and arm bones, was taken in the hospital ambulance to this illiterate ex-barber of Puttar, and within a month reported himself for executive duty. The secret of the man is an uncanny gift for bone setting. He has never looked into a book of anatomy, and a vegetable oil which he keeps pouring on the bandage. His story is that he discovered the herb from which he extracts the oil by accident when hunting in the nearby jungle. He wrapped up a deer in the leaves and found on his return home that all its broken bones had set again. The ex-barber continues to live in his hut and has hitherto refused all offers of money for his services. But he will not reveal the secret because he believes that the magic will disappear. Inherited secrets. But surely there must be a way of enlightening him, some other inducement which may make him yield the secret. Dozens of miracles like these still survive in India, and every Indian and many Britishers who have toured in the districts and villages can furnish other such examples. But these obscure recipes are fast dying out. Their formula are usually handed down in code from father to son, but sometime or other the secret is lost, and it may be ages before the world rediscovers it. The English-educated children of these men too readily scoff at such remedies as old-fashioned, and, because some of them are just quackeries, will tar the whole lot with the same brush. It would be well worth the while of the more advanced world to collect and sift all such information from India and to organize scientific investigation of some of these miracles, for out of such research may flow incalculable benefit to humanity. Now, I sent that report off to my friend Abhijit Chanda in India. And I think in a future episode of the Skeptic Zone, I might chat to Abhijit about the so-called godmen of India. And speaking of India, we have another story about snake charming. Now, there are two types of snake charming. There's the one that you may be familiar with, where the snake charmer plays a tune on a pipe, and the snake appears from a basket and seems to follow the music or the pipe. It appears the snake is really following the movement rather than the sound. And another area of snake charming are people who find snakes. And I think this is what this report refers to. And this is from the Southern Argus from South Australia, dated the 6th of September, 18 72. Snake charming. The Madras Mail gives an interesting account of the whole art and mystery of snake charming. We have long felt convinced that the whole process of snake catching by professional charmers, as ordinarily witnessed by English spectators in India, was a clever piece of jugglery. We therefore determined, not long ago, to examine the operation impartially but strictly, and with this view we organised a party of critics. 2 snake charmers were sent for, and on their assuring us that the appearance of our garden indicated the presence of snakes, permission was given for them to charm our reptiles out of their holes. One of the men set to work, and in a few minutes his face lightened up with the satisfaction of success. He had discovered a snake. The party were called around and shown the snake in the hole. As Theodore Hook persuaded a London mob that the lions in Northumberland House wagged their tails, I wonder what that story is, so did this man, by determined asseveration, make some of us believe that we actually saw the snake in its hole. Being satisfied that the snake was there, the charmer was told to proceed. In an instant, he seized the snake, pulled it out of the hole, and threw it on the ground. Nothing could have been more convincing. For having watched the man most closely, we were all confident that the snake had not been let loose in the first instance. The charmers were directed to make another search. Before commencing, the men were examined. Their clothes and turbans were opened and shaken. But on requesting to be allowed to wear them as protection against the attacks, they were permitted to resume their clothing. They smiled at our incredulity and asserted that, to prove they were not mere jugglers, they would catch more snakes, which of course they did. Skepticism, however, still had its doubts, notwithstanding the clear evidence presented to the sight. Another trial was made, and when one of the charmers was some little distance from his basket, he was rushed upon and seized by the skeptics, who wanted to examine his clothing with their own hands. The rogue cried for mercy and begged to be spared the humiliation of being forcibly stripped. "No quarter," was the reply he was met with. Then he confessed that his trade was deception, and that he would show us, before our very eyes, how he caught snakes. A complete circle being formed around, having just sufficient room for him to swing his arm in, he produced from the midst of us a huge cobra 7 feet long. Skepticism was triumphant, and the much-injured charmer looked as most impostors do when their tricks are discovered. The plan of operation was then explained to us. Snakes, having had their fangs extracted, are put into separate bags, and the mouth closed by a slip knot. This bag is then fastened to a string, which all natives wear around the wrist, with the mouth downwards. The charmer swoops down and sweeps up bits of grass and earth with the right hand, and simultaneously the slip knot is drawn by the left hand into the palm of which the snake naturally drops. The right hand is brought up with a swoop and meets the left, from which the snake is passed into the right, which then flourishes the reptile in the face of the terrified but admiring spectators. That must have been quite a sight. To make sure that this in itself was not an impostor, the man's basket was examined, and between the top and a cloth loosely thrown over it were several bags tied up, with snakes in them. Wishing to assure ourselves still further whether this was the usual plan of deception followed by these people, some other snake charmers were sent for, and their baskets, being suddenly seized and examined, were found to have on the top 7 or 8 bags with different kinds of snakes in them. not so charming snake charmers way back there in 1872. And when you visit Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Coming up on next week's show, we might take a look at this recent NASA UFO, don't say UFO anymore, UAP press conference. And are there aliens visiting Earth? I don't think even NASA thinks so. We'll look into that possibly next week. Thank you to all those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at skepticzone.tv via Patreon or PayPal. Your contributions are vital. But for this week, before I fly back home, this is Richard Saunders signing off from near San Francisco. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
So I'm here with my good buddy, Mark Hiller.
Wow. I didn't know it was your good buddy.
And we're about to play the dice game.
Ooh.
Yeah, I know. This is the highlight of the whole podcast.
The whole day. It's frightened now.
Oh, shush. Okay. You are the mentalist. No, you are the mentalist. So you are going to be guessing using your psychic powers.
I never
guess. I know. If anybody has psychic powers, it is you.
That is true.
That is true. So I have a 6-sided dice right here. I'm showing it to you. See, all the numbers are different.
Yeah.
See?
I
Okay.
see that.
All right. So I'm going to roll it.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to roll it 3 times.
And I'm going to predict a number?
You're going to predict a number. Yes, you are going to predict a number. So
from 1 to 6.
And includes 1 and 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, I have it.
You have it?
Yeah.
Well, say it out loud.
3.
Okay, so here we go. First roll. It's a 6.
It's only half right.
Right. Okay. Well, now, do you want to pick a different number for this next one?
No. Same number. Same number. 3.
Okay. Here it goes. Ready? Second roll.
5.
5. That's my number.
But you didn't say anything.
Well, everybody listening knows I always choose 5. Okay.
Oh,
but sorry. But anyway, so
I have one more.
You have one more chance, Mark. Now you are the person who should be able to do this.
If I could do this, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
What would you be doing right now if you could predict the roll of a die?
In Las Vegas.
Oh.
Of course.
Here, do you want to blow on the die or something? Or do you have some magic woo-woo?
The female does that.
The female does it?
Yes. Okay. 3.
Okay. I'm going to say a 5. Here we go. It's a 5!
You win. You win.
I had 2 5s. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry, Mark. You didn't get your 3.
It just shows you that psychics, you can't depend on them.
Oh, I know.
Isn't that the whole point?
Yeah, I know. All right, everybody. So the rolls were 6, 5, 5. All big numbers. Let's go to Vegas. We'll go in October.
Bye-bye.